Good morning, Troy Love. Great
Good,
to see you.
good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Anxious to hear what you've got to share with us today.
Oh, great. Thanks. I'm wondering, with the participants who are here right now, if any of them have watched any of the previous videos that I've done with you. So maybe they could either put it in the chat box or
You
they,
put it in the
uh,
chat, or even you can do the raise your hand, and then we
mm-hmm.
would know.
Because I have a couple of things prepared, but I'm that's one of my first questions. Are these new people or are these people who've been with us before? And then opening it up to questions if there's anything that they have questions about before I jump into the stuff that I
We've
have.
got new and first-time viewers, so welcome. We're so glad you're here. So there's a so for those of you that are joining that are new, let me back up. This is not therapy. This is not 12-step. This is, all of these webinars are, experts in the field who are sharing their time. They're all volunteers, and they're sharing their time, bringing information and answering your questions. This is recorded. We have many people that are finding it on YouTube, so that's great. But anything that you ask or share, we don't, say who it is, or identify you in any way. So it is your opportunity to ask, questions. But I think, Troy, even if you're sharing a continuation of something else, we would invite those of you that are joining that maybe feel like, oh, I'm missing something. It's recorded. Go back and watch the previous videos. I'll put a link to where that is in the chat. But for those of you listening on sexandrelationshiphealing.com, under resources, you'll see previous webinars. And then there's also, you can go to the YouTube. We are in the process of creating a YouTube channel that will be more organized, but we're not there yet. So more is coming. So
That's fun. Um, that's good. So it sounds like there's a lot of new people. So I'm gonna uh, so because you're new, maybe you don't have any questions for me, but if you do, then now I'm open to them. To give you a little bit about what I do, I focus on what I call attachment wounds, and I'll show you what those are in just a second. Um, but attachment wounds are, as we grow up, as we go through this world, we end up having issues with the people that we are most bonded with. We have things that happen to us that cause us a lot of pain, and then when those wounds, they get created when we bump up against them. Sometimes life happens and bumps up against those wounds. It opens up those wounds again, and just like a regular wound, if somebody bumps your sunburn or whatever, it causes us pain. And over the course of our life, as we have been experiencing these wounds, we also end up developing some core beliefs about ourselves that I used to say get tattooed on our heart, but really they get tattooed on our nervous system, and it activates that fight or flight response. Oh, dang, I just lost it, but the I'll think about it in a minute, but it activates our nervous system, and we go into fight or flight response. And if we still can't find relief, it goes into shutdown mode. Um, so that's what I work with, and then try to help people figure out, well, what can we do to rewrite those messages? How can we heal those wounds? Um, how can we heal those wounds and move forward and find peace in our lives? So that's in a nutshell what I do. So oftentimes what I found is that 100% of the guys that I work with who are struggling with sex addiction have these wounds. And then when we're working with the betrayed partners, they have these wounds too. And that, so as we're interacting with each other and we're trying to support each other, and we're also dealing with our own kind of pain, that can cause a lot of conflicts and struggles in the relationship. And we don't do it intentionally, but because we're operating from a place of pain, our brain is on hyper alert to try and not get hurt again, and it really holds us back from being able to actually connect because we don't really feel safe because our amygdala and other parts of our brain are telling us this is danger, danger, danger. And so we're going to do what we're going to do to protect ourselves. I still can't think of the name of what I was trying to say, but that's okay. So I open it up first to questions to see if anybody has any questions. And then if not, I'll tell you what the core beliefs are. I'm trying to find them on my computer so
Well,
I
I've
can.
got a question for you because you're
Sure.
talking about couples and you're talking about if the person with a compulsive addictive behavior has attachment wounds and the partner has some attachment wounds, I could see it being this dance of our attachment wounds, and trying to figure out how we get off the merry-go-round, to start changing the patterns that we keep repeating. But I could see my wound being, I'm going to try to get this whatever, or the security, but like it wouldn't be, it would bump up against your attachment wound. So like, I'm never going to get exactly what I need. You're never going to get exactly what you need. How do you get off that merry-go-round?
So one of the first things with Sue Johnson's work with emotionally focused couples therapy, one of the first things she does in her work is try to help us identify and notice that pattern. And she says to give it a name, even like let's call it. And so different couples call it different things, and that's fine, but let's identify what that pattern looks like. And I think last time we met I did a video on that infinity loop that couples get stuck in when they're stuck there, but giving that a name and then being able to identify, hey, we're in that place again. I don't want to do that. Can we figure out a way to get out of that place? And so that's one of the first things, is just coming to an awareness. The other part to notice, though, is that when those wounds get hit, it does activate our nervous system. And so we change states in that moment. Before, we were maybe calm and when we were rational, but the moment that that wound gets bumped, and it activates our our limbic system, then whew, then we're not in the place where we're going to react sensibly. If you just kind of look at what happens when we go to fight or flight response, the blood that normally is going to our prefrontal cortex, where we are making rational decisions and we're able to control our emotions and we're able to focus on things, all that goes away. Like if we do brain scans, we can see there's not a whole lot of activity in that part of the brain because the blood has now gone to our lungs, our heart, our biceps, our quads, so we can get out, we can run away. So we're not thinking very clearly in those places. And so being able to identify, hey, this is what's going on, and develop some strategies that we can regulate that ourselves will help us be able to get out of that loop. And it's Stephen Stosny talks about, we learn how to do all of this stuff in a different state. We learn how to do this in a learning state, but when we're activated, that's a completely different state. And so the more that we can practice grounding and all those kind of things, which is one of the things I wanted to go over today, is 2 tools to help with that. The more we can practice that, the more that that becomes ingrained in our mind, and we can step into that place and calm ourselves down, and then say to our partner, hey, we've been doing that thing and I don't want to do that thing because it never ends out well. And so let's see if we can change that dynamic a little bit.
I think move to those grounding tools. I think those would be great
Okay,
no matter what. I think those are super
great.
helpful, particularly in
Oh,
these times.
for some reason, my computer restarted, and all my PowerPoints that I usually go to I would have to go look for them.
Well, there
So
you go.
yeah, so I'll just tell you what the 6 wounds are, and then I'll walk you through a little bit with that, and then I'll go into the grounding tools. So the 6 wounds are loss, neglect, rejection, abandonment. She's typing those. So abandonment, betrayal, or abuse. And so just to give a little bit of a explanation about each one of those. Loss is the wound that happens to us when it's not necessarily that anybody did anything to us. But if we had a connection with a loved one and they passed away, they had cancer and they died, or right now with COVID-19, there's a lot of loss going on. The loss of being able to go to a graduation, the loss of being able to attend a funeral of a loved one, the loss of being able to go to church. Though that's a loss that nobody, I mean, yeah, COVID-19 is doing that, but nobody's like saying, well, I hate you, so I'm going to ruin your life by taking away those kind of things. So the loss is a wound that a lot of people can resonate with right now. That is really tender, and the expectations and the hopes and the dreams of whatever's going on is like been taken away. That's a big loss, and that hurts. That can be really painful for us, and trying to figure that out. Neglect is, I mean, there's the Child Protective Services version of neglect where the parents have not fed their kids for 3 days and they're out doing drugs and who knows where in the heck they are. That's like the like horrible version of neglect. But then there's also the neglect that a lot of us experience when our loved ones are in the home. They are there, but they aren't paying attention to us. They're too involved in their phone or too involved in whatever else that they're doing. And my attempts to try and get your attention are not working because you're too busy doing something else. And if you're a kid and you were experiencing that kind of neglect, the message that really gets written on your nervous system is, well, I must not matter. I must not be that important. That's the wound that usually gets written there. Rejection is when somebody flat out says, I don't like you. There's, you're not, I don't, you don't, you're not picked. You are picked last on the team, you get fired, whatever. Like there's this sense of there's something wrong with you, and so you're not good enough to be a part of us. That's the message that comes with rejection. Abandonment is when somebody walks out of your life and there's no explanation. They just stop talking to you. They they're gone. There's no closure. There's no explanation. So we're left thinking, well, what's wrong with me? There must have been something wrong with me, especially if that happened as a child. Uh, we don't have the cognitive ability to really identify, well, they had problems. They were going through stuff. We just think, well, there must be something wrong with me. What is it? And then we start asking ourselves, well, what's wrong with me? And as soon as we ask that question, we'll come up with a million reasons why what's wrong with us, but what's wrong with me? Betrayal is when you have a relationship of trust with someone and then they violate that trust. So obviously that one happens a lot when we're dealing with sex addiction and the betrayed partner. I love Brene Brown used the analogy, and then I stole it, of the trust jar. So like we have this jar and there's marbles in it, just like in elementary school, a classroom teacher puts a jar, and if the kids are good, she'll put marbles in the jar. And if they earn enough marbles, they get to the top, they have some kind of pizza party or popcorn party or something like that. But if they misbehave, then she takes marbles out. And that's what the trust jar does too. So we have this jar, and oftentimes it was full. Like the spouse thought that things were a way that they were, so there was a lot of trust, and then they find out that their partner's been living a double life. They find out that this has been going on for a really long time, and it's like all of a sudden we just dumped all the marbles out of the jar, and they feel so empty and scared, and they don't know what to do with that. And it's going to take time to put those marbles back in the jar, but that wound of all of a sudden all of that's gone, that's betrayal, and that can hurt really really around uh, badly. And then abuse, which is sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and that's a kind of a combination of all the others. So um, many of us have more than one of those wounds, uh, but they're not active all the time. We don't walk around feeling like we're rejected all the time or abandoned all the time, but things will happen. Things will be said, or you'll watch a television show, somebody will give you a look, Somebody will remind you something, somebody will say something, and bam, that hits that wound and then activates that. And then, like I said before, that then there are negative core beliefs that we have ingrained in us that also get activated at that time. So I'm not enough, there's something wrong with me, I'm not worthy, I'm bad, those kind of things. And so part of the process is identifying what's the wound and what's the negative core belief that's gotten activated, and where do I feel that in my body. So that's the first step, really, is figuring out what that is, and then what are we going to do about that. So any questions or thoughts about that?
No one's put any questions, but as you're ticking through those, very like I had visual reactions, to some of those. Even the trust jar, I thought, I think for some of the partners, they don't feel like the jar got tipped over. They feel like somebody took a baseball bat and smashed it. Like
Yeah.
there's no jar left. And so to be able to repair and to start, creating the space to be able to build trust, takes time. I know for the clients that come to Seeking Integrity Los Angeles, as we're assessing and identifying what's going on, you're right. Though, there's abandonment, rejection, and often, people can't think because it was normalized. And like you were saying, I come up with the reasons why I'm the problem versus looking at the situation, because that's the only lens we have to look, at things through. So they'll go, oh, my childhood was great. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's the story we've told. But then when you start, doing assessments and really unpacking things, then all of those, or a combination, not all, but, some combination of those,
Mm-hmm.
is at the core, which provides the perfect setup. If you need to find a safe space, you dissociate, you escape. And isn't addiction a great way to numb out and escape having to deal with difficult feelings or situations? So it's a safety place. It just becomes a maladaptive coping mechanism, and then it becomes highly problematic and causing your relationship, you're not connected in a healthy way, you're not attached, you're not able to, you don't have the tools to be able to do that, because you've always had to go over here to, to escape because it wasn't safe. So really helping clients understand that, but then giving them the tools to be able to do things differently. You can create, I guess my big message is there's hope, because there
Right.
are tools to use to change this. It doesn't always have to be, the maladaptive coping mechanisms.
Yeah. Thank you. So let me go into one of the ways to regulate some of that. This comes from Kristen Neff, who is one of the experts on self-compassion. You can go to her website, self-compassion.org. And so she she has a lot of tools that are about there. So there's a question in the chat box, which I think I will answer as I'm going to that. The question was, all of these wounds contribute to my feelings of not being good enough. How do you be aware all the time? And that's a really good question. I think that especially if these wounds are pretty raw, your brain is alert all the time. It's on hyper alert all the time. And it's looking for evidence all the time to be able to protect you. What can I do to protect me? And then that gets exhausting, and then that's where we end up going into the numbing, because living like that's like horrible. But your brain is always on the alert, and what it's doing, there's a part of your brain called the reticular activating system. I didn't name that. That's what they call it. It's like it operates from the back of your brain, and it becomes a filter. So when I have the negative core belief that there's something wrong with me, that gets lodged into my reticular activating system, and that becomes the filter by which I am looking at the world. And now what is it doing? Looking for evidence to support my belief that there's something wrong with me. all the time. It's on hyper alert. Oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another one. And that just builds shame. That's just like shame, just like overwhelming. And we talk about the shadows of shame. And we've talked about that before, and we'll talk about it again because I think it's helpful. But that becomes the prism by which we see the world. Oh my gosh, that's really overwhelming. I I still catch myself doing that. I'm like, oh my gosh, there it is again. Um, so looking at that and saying, well, so recognizing my brain is already on hyper alert, it's what can I do to calm it down? What can I do to regulate that? So the first tool I want to talk about today is what Kristen Neff calls the self-compassion moment. And the self-compassion moment is, I'm going to walk you through it. So I'm going to have everyone do it with me. And I'd love to hear what your experience is like after. You can put that in the chat box or whatever. So I want you to think about a time recently when one of those wounds got hurt, try to not make it like a big one, a big time, but just think of something recently, and you could focus on the lost wound or whatever wound you want, but just think about something recently in the last couple of days or the last week or two where one of those wounds got hit. And then I want you to close your eyes, and I just want you to notice where in your body you feel that wound. Where in your body do you feel that pain? And I want you to acknowledge that it hurts. And then you're going to say, and you can say it out loud or you can say it in your mind, you're going to say, this is a moment of suffering. And in that, you're going to acknowledge that it does hurt. You're not going to try and minimize it. You're not going to try and push it away. You're going to hold space for it for just a moment. This is a moment of suffering. And you're going to give yourself permission to feel the pain and validate that it really does hurt. So just spend a minute there, and then I want you to take a deep breath, and then I want you to say, I am not alone in my suffering. And as you say that, I want you in your mind's eye to recognize that there are other people, people that you may know and people that you may not know who've also been experiencing this same wound. They've been experiencing loss, or they've experienced rejection, or they've experienced abandonment, or whatever the wound was that you chose. There are people that you know, people that you don't know, but across the world with 8 billion people, there is somebody else who has experienced the pain that you felt. And because of that, you're not alone in your suffering. Somebody out there understands, somebody else out there comprehends what it is that you're feeling, and they have compassion for you, and you can have compassion for them because of their hurting, and their connection to you helps you not have to carry this pain all by yourself. So just in your mind's eye, recognize and 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 imagine that there are people all around you who can relate to you, who can understand the wound because they felt it too, and just let them be with you for just a moment. And then take a deep breath. Now I want you to do some gesture of compassion for yourself, whether that's giving yourself a hug or putting your hand on your arm and just rubbing it, or putting your hand on your face, some kind of act like maybe you would do for a child who is hurting, what you would do as a gesture of comfort for that one. I want you to do that to yourself, whatever that looks like for you. And just notice as you're doing that, that you can feel the heat between your hand and the part of your body that you're touching, and just acknowledge that. You can feel the pressure that's there. And then I want you to say out loud or in your mind, may I be kind to myself. And just be kind and gentle with yourself right now. And then think about something that you would love a loved one to say to you in this moment of suffering. What is something that would bring you comfort? What is something that would bring you encouragement? What's something that would help you as you're enduring this pain? What is something that you would love to hear someone say to you in this moment of discomfort? And then I want you to say it to yourself. And just breathe that in and just feel that comfort and those comforting words. And then take a deep breath. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So I'm curious if anyone wants to type in the chat box what that was like for them. I'd love to hear that. I'd love to hear from you, Tammy, about what that was like for you.
Well, interestingly, because you said, where do you feel it? And I thought, my gut. It's like in my gut. And I noticed it was a challenging day yesterday, and my guts were all tight, and like I could feel it. And then as I'm going through that exercise, I felt it release. And then even as I was giving myself a hug, and the pressure of my hands, around my waist, and I was like, but now my gut doesn't feel like this.
Hmm.
And it was genuinely, a moment of release and soothing. And I'm going like, I don't have to carry that around,
Hmm.
now. So I really am grateful.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm great. I'm grateful. I'm hoping other people had that kind of expression too. So a couple of things about that. That took what, 5 minutes maybe, because I was talking a lot. Um, Usually it doesn't take that long. So the 3 steps are, this is a moment of suffering. And so you say that out loud and you validate that this is a moment of suffering. And then second, I'm not alone in my suffering. And then may I be kind to myself. I think with people who do that, where they get stuck is that last one. May I be kind to myself. Because we haven't been very kind to ourselves. A lot of times that shame just is like, so mean to us. So we will say things like, I can do this, I'm okay, it's gonna be all right. Like we can say those kind of things, but our shame may be pushing that away even in that moment, and that's okay. Like we just notice that, and we continue to just allow ourselves to, for a moment, be kind to ourselves. I was reading. I've been studying a lot about changing habits, and one of the things that I learned recently is that if you're trying to break a habit, you pick the change that you want to do, and you pick something that you cannot help but be successful. There's no way in the world that you can fail at. And I thought about that, and so for example, if I'm struggling with a sex addiction and I want to go look at porn or something, I can set a goal for myself that for the next 5 minutes, I'm not going to do that. There's no way in the world I'm going to fail that. And so I just had some success. The same can be applied to, for the next 5 minutes or the next 30 seconds, I'm going to say something kind to myself. There's no way in the world that I can fail that. I'm going to say it. I'm just going to breathe that in. And then I did it. And so it's building on reminding us that we can do that. So that's part of that. So some people do struggle with that piece, but do it anyway. Keep practicing it anyway. So
Someone shared that they'd had a huge realization that that they suffered abuse from 6 to 11 years old from someone that I trusted and should have been able to rely on. And now I believe that the years of what I did not know is abuse. So this is great information. And this person identifies that they live with an abuser that they love. So they're in that particular dynamic. So thoughts on that, Troy?
yeah, so that thank you for your courage in sharing that. Part of this process is being able to connect with the truth, and that will lead us into the next one that I'm going to do in a second. Is leading is checking out what is it that I then believe about myself. If my abuser is behaving the way they're behaving, that's their stuff, and they'll have to work through that, or they don't. Whatever that's their journey, and if I love that person and I want to be supportive, what I really have to take a look at is, okay, well, what am I ending up believing about myself every time they behave in a way that's abusive? Am I agreeing with the message, even if it's subconscious? Am I agreeing with the message that there's something wrong with me, that I'm not enough, that I'm bad, that I'm unworthy? All that. If I'm agreeing with that, that continues to keep me stuck in the abusive relationship. What we want to be able to do is rewrite that and connect with the truth that I'm enough, that I matter, that I have significance, that I'm worthy of love. And when you're able to tap into that and you are able to let that fill your body, you will start to make some decisions that are different than the decisions you were made when you were in the wounded state of being. When you're in that empowered state of being, you're going to make decisions. And I don't know what those decisions are. You're going to make decisions that are in your best interest and in the best interest of the people that you love. That's going to be different than making those decisions out of fear or whatever. And Stephen Stosny does a really good job of helping people work through and connect with that sense of what he calls core value. If I can connect with my core value, which in my terms is I'm erasing the negative core beliefs and I'm revealing the truth that was actually covered up this whole time, that I'm enough, that's going to change the way that I interact with people. And as I'm changing, it also shifts the dynamics of the relationship, because the other person now has somebody different to respond to. And how they respond, I can't control that, but it does shift the dynamics because I've connected with who I really am.
And I appreciate that. I often hear from partners, and I'm trying to say this in the right way, but they will take on responsibility, I think, for the abuse, or make excuses of like, well, it was, I fought with him, so therefore. And for me, I take a pretty hard line with, there is never a justification for not having a safe place.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very challenging to hear that. And I think that there are things that spouses and partners can do to create a safe boundary for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
even within the dynamic. And I get loving someone and understanding, codependence is all about um,
Right.
loving someone that is broken, and healthy wanting to be a healthy attachment. But it also is about creating safe boundaries, for yourself and anyone else in this space. But the abuser has choices other than abusing. There are other options than taking it out on someone else.
Mm-hmm.
They may not have the tools yet to do so, but it's very challenging. I hope, if you're in that situation, that you get safety, and that you seek professional help to help guide the process. So
Yeah, and the boundaries is a really big thing, and we talk a lot about that, especially with partners, but also with the people struggling with addiction. I am much better equipped to be able to set and maintain those boundaries if I'm resonating with my core truth, that I matter, that I'm enough. If I'm falling into that belief that there's something wrong with me, I'm bad, oh, I can say the words, I can say what I'm going to not tolerate, or I can express those boundaries. But if I don't believe it inside, it's really hard for me to let that light inside of me maintain that boundary. So it's really connecting with the truth that I really am enough, that I am worthy of being loved. I'm worthy of having safety. If I let that resonate with me, man, that really sets up my ability to enforce that boundary far, far more successfully.
well, and like you said earlier too, creating a safe boundary for me is also creating a safe boundary for the relationship and the other person.
Mm-hmm.
So it isn't just punitive. It really is about creating, what will be helpful for the relationship as well as myself.
Right. Yeah. So let me give you the second tool. If anybody has any questions, we are open to that as well. So the second tool is really taking a look at the negative core belief. Like I said, we haven't gone into a whole lot of talk about shame. I mean, we talked a little bit about shame, but shame is the deep and abiding belief that I'm flawed and defective and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. And shame talks to us. And in my work, I personify shame into different characters, and I don't want to really go into that so much. But just kind of, you hear that voice that's talking to you in the back of your head and saying stuff like you're not enough and there's something wrong with you. And if you listen carefully and you identify it, it's you can like separate you from that voice, and you can be able to identify, hey, that voice is talking to me. You're not schizophrenic, don't worry. But that voice is talking to me, and I don't like what it's saying, and I can push that away a little bit. But that's what shame is. It's that internal dialogue that's just talking to you all the time. And part of the strategy is separating you from that and recognizing, you know what, I'm not you. And we've talked about that before. But you can either identify what it is, the negative core belief that's attached to your wound, or you can also identify, well, what's the main message that the shadow of shame is saying, because they are often very much the same. The negative core message is what's been wired into my system. Shame is the voice that reinforces that, if that makes sense. So if I can connect with what that message is and I can rewrite it, then shame doesn't have a job to do anymore. It doesn't have anything to say because its job is done. Um, so if you can think about your wound, whatever that wound happens to be, loss, neglect, rejection, abandonment, betrayal, or abuse, what is one of the main core messages that's been written on your heart as it relates to that wound? And if you could just identify that, what that is, and it's helpful if you wrote it down on a piece of paper. You don't have to, but it's helpful to do that, to just get it out of your head and put it down on a piece of paper. Whatever that is, I don't need to know what that is. A lot of them pretty very similar. Well, what is it? And then as you're looking at that piece of paper and you're writing down and you're looking at it, just notice what happens inside of you as you're reading these words on the paper. And just notice where you feel that the emotions that come up with this message. Just notice where you're feeling that. Very similar to what we did in the first part of the self-compassion moment. Where do I feel that in my body? What does it feel like? And so just noticing that. And then I'm going to have you just close your eyes for a second. And I'm going to ask you a question. What is your deepest knowing about this belief? What is your deepest knowing about this belief? And just sit with that question for a minute. And just notice what is coming up for you. And then when we don't have time to do that because we're in a webinar, but what I would encourage you to do is that you write down what the answer is. What is your deepest knowing? Where do you feel that in your body? I'm writing it down. Where do you feel that in your body? Does it feel different? And if you can connect with what is the deepest knowing, what is really true, and you can connect with that, then notice where you feel that in your body and allow that to start to expand throughout your entire body. Some people will imagine like a beam of light coming from the universe, God, wherever, coming down into your head, touching that part of your deepest knowing, wherever that happens to be, and then letting that light begin to spread out through your entire body, and then going out all the way down through your feet, down into the ground. And so it becomes this pillar of power. And just visualizing that, whatever color you want that light to be, just noticing what that's doing as it's connecting with what your deepest knowing is about that belief, and just allowing that to just sit and grow and do what it does within your body. And taking a deep breath and allowing that to work inside of you. And then taking another deep breath, and then when you're ready, you can open your eyes, and then looking at what you wrote on the paper and noticing what feels different about you now. So I'm curious to know what that was like.
Interesting that it was a different place. Like I felt that more in my heart.
Okay.
And as soon as I opened up my eyes and looked at this, I want to just I want to cross it out.
Yeah.
Like this is not true, you know?
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
yeah, yeah, and interesting, just you know, a simple technique, you know, but even the, you know, the, like when you're talking about the energy and feeling it, like I could feel, you know, kind of energy moving all the way down, probably because I let myself relax into it and
Mm.
feel it rather than, you know, when we started and my guts all clenched up, you know,
Yeah.
like I'm in a different, you know, I can be in a different place.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for being willing to do that with me. It's awesome.
Always good to learn new stuff. So
Yeah. Any comments about that? What was that like for you? Did anybody struggle with that a little bit? I'd love to hear from that, or if anybody thought that was awesome, whatever. I'd love to hear that. Or if you have other questions, we're open to that.
yeah, there you can put questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You can put comments in the chat. You can go just to panelists and then we'll see it. So um, this is your time to ask and get answers. That one felt better than than the self hug earlier. That's interesting, and it was good too. But this is more powerful, so
Mm,
that's interesting. So, but how good that you go. Okay, that one helped me more. You
mm-hmm,
know, and it might be in this moment this helps me more. In that moment
mm-hmm,
that helps me more. So
mm-hmm.
interesting.
Very good. Well, so I'm, those are the tools that I have. If, do you have questions or anything you want to go over?
I think it's great if anybody has questions. Fantastic. Well, oh, we got a question. I was gonna say, oh, we got multiple. Oh, I found the first one easier. That's interesting. So two different people, and one found the first one easier than the second one. So somebody asked, how does one go about talking about these wounds with a partner?
I love that question.
Yeah.
So, the one of the guidelines in talking to your partner about this is that you don't want to use the suffix ed at the end. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, neglected or
Oh,
rejected or abandoned, because there is a connotation of blame. You abandoned me, you rejected me, you neglected me. There's a connotation of blame. And so if they feel blamed, that's going to rub up against their rejection wound. And unless they've done their own work, they can step into that empathy. It's going to go into uh, their wounds are going to be activated, and then into the cycle you go. So part of that is being able to talk about what rejection feels like for you. And one of the things you can say is, hey, I learned about these 6 wounds today. I learned about wounds of rejection and abandonment and abuse. And as I'm really thinking about it, some of the wounds that I've really carried through with me since I was a kid was neglect or abandonment. This is what it feels like for me when it gets hit. It really hurts. And then asking them, hey, what are some of your wounds? What does it feel like for you when it gets hit? And just talking about it, not around it, kind of talking around it a little bit, saying, hey, this is what it's like for me. And if you're able to then get able to talk about that, then the other piece with that is having compassion for their wounds. If I can have compassion for your wounds, I'm hoping you can have compassion for my wounds. um, that's really helpful. There are times I think I've talked about this before. There were times where I've had a couple in counseling and where they're working and the spouse is trying to share with the partner about their wounds, and the partner's like, I can't hear that. I don't care about your wounds. I
Mm.
don't care that you hurt. I just, I hurt so bad that I don't care about you, what you're hurt. And when I hear that, it helps me understand where they're at. And what that means is we're not going to be able to help them connect as a partner yet because she was hurting so bad she didn't have space for her husband's pain. So we needed to do some more work with her to help heal some of that woundedness so that she could have more compassion for him. Because in the end, we have to have compassion for each other's wounds. That's what moves us to want to treat each other with dignity and respect and kindness and all of that, because we have compassion for each other. But if we're wounded and we're so pained in ourselves, we're in that fight or flight response all the time. We don't have space to be hold hold any space for you and your wounds. I'm so overwhelmed with mine. So part of that is uh, introducing it and talking a little bit. Hey, this is what it's like for me. And then taking it a little bit deeper. Hey, when you say this, man, that really bumps up against my rejection mood. So notice I didn't say, when you say this, it's like you rejected me, because there's blame. It's when you say this, it's like it bumped up against my wound, my stuff. It's mine to own. It's my pain. It's my stuff. You bumped up into it. So, hopefully you'll take ownership of that. But I'm talking to you about, hey, this is what happened when it hit this and it hurt. And I'm in a lot of pain. And what I really need from you right now is compassion, a hug, an apology, whatever. But it's me owning all my stuff in that process. Does that help?
Yeah, no, I think it does. But I'm also thinking, we talk particularly early on in recovery, how it's important for each person to have their support, not just from their spouse or partner, because there isn't the capacity, there isn't the space. I was also thinking when you're talking how good this would be to have it be a discussion and not in the moment with, hey, it just happened,
Right.
because then I'm in that fight or flight and I'm in, the whole agitated. But if Dr. Rob talks about having time, every day or whatever, a regularly scheduled time to talk about things. So it's a discussion. And I think that helps take it out of the emotional and throwing things at it. But I do love that, you're saying it in a way that, you know, what happened bumped up against my whatever. So I'm taking ownership of it. I realize it's my wound. I'm trying to heal it. I know I've got work to do on it. And even if it's, they can't give you a hug or whatever in the moment, it's like, I just need you to know that this is an issue for me. And at some point, I want to be able to move into I can vision us moving to a different place where you can give me a hug, and am able to articulate it in the moment. So, but yeah, good question. Let's see if there's something else here. I missed the belief. What is the belief?
So there's three genres of core beliefs. The first is the I am genre. There's something wrong with me. I'm too fat. I'm too skinny. I'm not pretty enough. I'm bad. I'm unworthy. Whatever. I am. It's all about me, my persona. I'm flawed. I'm defective. All that. So that's the first genre. It's about me and my persona. The second is about safety and trust. I can't trust you. I can't trust the world. The world is out to get me. I can't feel safe. Um, the environment isn't a place where I can really get my needs met. That's the second genre, is about the world, or in a relationship. And then the third is the genre of powerlessness, or the positive core belief would be a sense of power, but the negative core belief is a sense of powerlessness. I can't do this. It's never going to work out. I can't stop acting out. I can't live without my drug of choice. I can't stop eating sugar, whatever that happens to be. But that negative core belief, the genre of powerlessness. And so oftentimes we can have all three that get activated. The rejection wound, if my rejection wound gets activated, well, I'm not enough and I'm never going to be, like there's nothing I can do. Those two get activated. Safety and trust doesn't really, but those two get activated for me a lot. It's like, oh, and then if I think, well, and I want to go talk to somebody about it, that's when maybe the trust one gets activated. Well, who can I trust? There's nobody going to be able to understand me. That core belief. And so then we check it out. What's your deepest knowing about that? Well, there's nothing wrong with me. Yeah, there's actually some people I've talked to already who are open and able to help me with that. So we can, what's your deepest knowing about that? We can challenge that negative core belief.
So there's a question in here. My husband is in early recovery and it's hard to trust him to respond with empathy. He says he wants to hear more about my feelings, but when I've shared some things, he's gone into shame so much that he can't really be empathetic.
I love that. Thank you for that. That is so, so common. That is so, so common. And it's interesting, the antidote or the medicine for shame is empathy. So that the fact that he's trying is like, I want to cheer for him. Um, I know that that's got to be so hard for him, and it's hard for you because you're trying to say, hey, here, let me share with you. There's a desire to connect, and then immediately he goes into shame, and what does he do? Well, he pulls away. And what does that do? It probably activates either the neglect wound or the abandonment wound at that moment, and he like pulls away. And so now I'm left hurting again. So why don't I want to open up to you again? You're just going to keep pulling away. So hopefully that will get better with time. Hopefully he's in a program where he's able to work on some of that shame, especially in a group with other men where he can talk about some of that shame that he's been carrying so long, and like, I've done this, and then 5 other people say, oh, I've done that too. And well, look, you look like a pretty decent dude. Like, you don't look bad like a monster like I do. And that helps shift some of that. And then over time, he gets better. Especially early on recovery, and you identified that his ability to really be empathic is really, really small. That muscle hasn't been developed yet. And so if he's conscious of it and he's wanting to work on it, it's just like any other thing, it will get better. And him being able to check that in, and hopefully he can go to his buddies and say, hey, my wife tried to open up to me and then I totally went into shame again. Let me try that again. And he just keeps trying. It will become easier and easier for him, and he'll learn how to do it. But just recognize it's partly because he's in early recovery and there's so much shame about this for him.
Yeah, 100%. When I read the first sentence, early recovery, I thought he doesn't have the tools, but he's trying and you're trying, yeah, I'm cheering for both of you. And it is hard. It's so difficult, but, I have a lot of hope because you're both, you're both in it. And, he can learn there, and there's a lot of support for both of you in this.
Yeah, empathy is a skill, by the way. Empathy is a skill set. Just like learning how to play the piano or learning how to throw a football or whatever your analogy is, empathy is a skill set. Um, and it requires two things. It requires us to be in tune with our own emotions. And especially for guys in our society, we have been taught not to be in tune with our emotions. We've been taught to shut those suckers down. We're not allowed to feel anything except for excitement. That's it. Um, and so part of this skill set is learning how to be in tune with his emotions. And then the second part of that is then I feel my emotions, and then I kind of guess what you might be feeling. So that you're disappointed, or you've been rejected. So what's the feeling you're feeling? I have to tap into myself and say, well, how would I feel if I was rejected? How would I feel if I was abandoned? Well, it would probably feel like that. That requires me to tap into my emotions and then say something like, well, is this how you're feeling? Is this what it's like for you? And that that's a skill. The good news is it can be learned, and with some good coaching, it can be learned fairly quickly. But it is a skill set that he
But
doesn't have right now.
and he has to be able, the in between is he has to be able to tolerate the emotions, because
Hmm.
if the acting out always removed having to deal with emotions, then all of a sudden I've got to deal with my emotions and your emotions, and oh my goodness. So it is challenging, but he, like I said, I see a lot of positive for that. There's another one. I have this feeling thing where it's plays over and over in my mind even when it's been years. These thoughts come randomly and my emotions are really intense, so intense that I act on it and start blaming and being angry over it. I just can't get over it.
So thank you for your courage in sharing that. I don't think you're alone in that either. I'm going to, it's been bugging me this whole time because I've been trying to figure out what it's called. It's called the polyvagal theory.
Oh, yes.
So you all can Google that. But the polyvagal theory was, it was not developed with therapy in mind. But but it has since become a tool that a lot of therapists use. There's the polyvagal nerve, like one of the biggest nerves in your body, and when it gets activated, then that's when we go into the fight or flight response, and then different parts of our nervous system gets activated. And so what you're talking about there is I'm going through my day like I haven't been triggered for like days, and then all of a sudden I see something, or I don't even notice it. I see something or I hear something, and bam, it just hit that wound. It hit that wound, and all of a sudden I'm flooded. I'm flooded with the negative core beliefs that I'm not enough. I'm flooded with a sense of fear, or I'm flooded with a sense of anger, or a sense of sadness. I'm flooded with all of that, and I don't know what in the world to do. Excuse me. I don't know what in the world to do with that. So immediately I go into those numbing behaviors, those protective behaviors of blaming and losing your temper. All of that, those are the symptoms, like the blame and the losing your temper, for example. Those are all symptoms of, wow, something got stirred up with me. So part of what I would be talking about with a client who's struggling with that is, okay, let's figure out what that wound is, and let's see if we can clean that up. And depending on the modality of therapy that the therapist uses, I use EMDR for stuff like that. EMDR is a pretty wonderful way of being able to shift some of those things in a relatively short period of time. There's other ways to do it as well, but we want to take some of those core wounded experiences that happen maybe early in childhood that keep showing up, and see if we can clean those up a little bit. Just like if somebody has like a necrotizing fasciitis on their skin is dying, we're going to have to go in and scrape that off. It sounds really awful, but the surgeon takes you in, numbs you up, scrapes that part of your skin off, and creates a new place for your skin to be able to grow and heal itself. And that's kind of the same that we're doing with this wound care. We got to go in and do some wound care and clean some of that stuff up so that it's not so reactive. I use the analogy a lot, like it's a sunburn. If you get a sunburn, you're pretty hypersensitive. You don't want anyone to come near you and touch you. But once the sunburn heals, if somebody bumps up against you, it's not a big deal. That's kind of the same with these wounds. Once we can heal them, somebody says something, it's like, oh, okay. And I don't have that uh, neurological response to that.
Yeah, yeah, and I've used the analogy too of having the deep wound, the infection, and if you are always putting a Band-Aid on the top of it, just going, oh, well, that's not a big deal or whatever, it never really heals. So that debriding that you were talking about is important to
Mm-hmm.
get down to, so that there can be healthy healing, from that. So we are out of time. Thank you, Troy, for being here. He'll be here at the end of the month for May, which I can't believe it's almost May.
Right?
But he'll
Crazy.
be here at the end of the month for May. So thank you to all of you for joining and for your questions. And keep coming back. There's lots more resources on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. See you next time.
Bye, guys.